Hey, here we are, June 14th. This is take 2, because I had me a visitor. June 14th, 2022. I'm Larissa, and Brody's in the house. He's in the house because he was being too rowdy. He was being way too rowdy, and he had to go inside. So, I do a whole bunch of stuff. I'm a crafty wench, as the saying goes. No, literally, I have a degree in craft. I make a lot of different things. While I have a craft approach, I am a fine artist. I call myself a multidisciplinary conceptual fine artist. I work with a concept, right? And my concept is beyond function, right? It's beyond function and it's beyond form, right? When you put form and function together, you have fine craft. When you add the layer of concept, you have fine art, whether it is craft or not. Now, you talk to some people in the art world, and you can have a big argument about this, right? The California College of the Arts, they dropped their C altogether. They used to be CCAC, now they're just CCA. And I think you do a disservice when you don't address craft. But anyway, concept. This is one of my garments, and these are my earrings, and this is it's fine craft, but it's also fine art in the larger scope of what my work is, because I deal a lot with the concept of upcycling and recycling and the idea of zero waste. And this is important to me in the act of creating something, because you have to have there's so much disposable everything, right? And commerce and economy are built on disposability, right? And so it's like this necessary evil in order for there to be commerce. So how do you address that as somebody who makes something and also has a deep care for the environment and for our planet in general? And so, like, concept with when I'm making garments, I make a lot of the clothes I wear, not all of them, but a lot of them. And the clothes that I make, I'm looking to have as little scrap as possible, or to be recycling textile, right? So this dress, this garment is linen, and I love linen. Flax is probably my favorite natural fiber to wear and to work with. It comes in so many different weights, and the color scheme of this garment also, the red, black, and white are it's a very, very ancient color scheme, and you find it on almost every continent, when you're looking at textiles from an anthropological standpoint. And that's because when you're dealing with fiber, a lot of people had goats or sheep or llama or alpaca or camel or whatever, and animals tend to have either a dark color fiber or a light colored fiber. And so a lot of the ancient textiles that are black are not in fact dyed. This is dyed, of course. This is dyed, but you'd have a dark colored fiber, which could be on any of the spectrum of brown to black. And then you'd have a light colored fiber, which would be white to ivory. And then you'd see red. And that's because red, traditional red dye, you can get that from berries, or more commonly insects, grinding insects. And I'm actually very, very allergic to red dye. I'm allergic to it. It makes my face itch. It does. And it makes me real aggro when I have it. And it gives me sores in my mouth. It's like awful. If I eat candy or anything that has red dye in it. It's that red number 40. It'll get you. Gets me. Totally gets me. Red number 40. But anyway, red dye. That's why you see that color scheme in traditional garments all over the globe. So this is this garment. It's my pattern. This is not an adapted pattern. Some of the garments that I make are from adapted patterns. Like the little recycled jacket I make is from an adapted pattern that I purchased, but this dress is not. So I just rolled out the fabric, and I could see the shape of the dress that I wanted, and the dress is kind of like bell-shaped, right? It's almost ankle length. It's like just above my ankle. And I used the salvage edge. I used the salvage edge for the hem. I like doing that. I like using the salvage edge when I can. Just, every piece of the fabric that you can use, right? Anyway, I drew the dress, right? Half of it. Like when you cut out a heart, you cut out half the heart, you fold the paper in half and cut it. Same thing with the dress. I did that. I cut out what I thought was going to fit me, right? What I eyeballed. And when I did it, I cut it out, I put it together. It was too small. I couldn't get my boobies in it. So then I just cut a straight line down the front. And I cut a straight line all the way down the back. And I put in this insert. This is also linen. It's a machine embroidered linen. I have a jacket and a pair of pants that I made out of this as well. I really like this pattern. It reminds me of music boxes. My dad made me a music box. I haven't spoken to him in a long time. Anyway, so I made this dress, and I have I have another garment that I've been working on. I call it my clown suit. I make it out of wild prints and things. Kind of looks like a clown suit. It's really comfortable, and focus of zero waste, and so it is made entirely out of straight lines without cutting away any fabric at all. It is made out of 4 rectangles and then strips that I use to make binding. And I've talked before about, how I make binding, how I recycle fabric and make binding. So they kind of look like clown suits. I had a great uncle who was a clown, and out of necessity, because it was either that or the sanatorium, and because he had a birth defect. And that's what they used to do with people who have birth defects. And that movie Freaks. Yeah. And the muscular defect that I have in my hip is a diluted version of what was wrong with his leg. That's where it comes from. Yeah. And it's painful. It hurts. It does. It hurts. Anyway. Oh, I forgot. Oh, the buttons on the dress. The buttons on the dress. These are antique. Silk embroidered buttons. And then my earrings. Made these. These are oak and turquoise and coral. And this is the cocoon of the beetle that is killing the oak trees and making such a huge fire hazard. And people are irritated because when we find those oaks, we burn them. We dug a fire pit to do that. And the reason I feel strongly about burning that, like you can chip the other brush or whatever, but the reason I feel strongly about burning that buggy oak is because the bugs I've watched. Little bird. Hey, little bird. The little birds are like, yes, you're right. I've watched. And what happens? The bugs find the tree, right? Then they come back the next year. Then they come back the next year. It's not the first time when the bug gets into the tree that the tree dies, right? It's not right away. It takes a little time. And how do they know which tree to come back to? Well, it's because insects use pheromones, right? Insects use pheromones, and that's how they come back. It marks the tree. So, like, when you find the buggy oak, if you're trimming those branches out, I feel really strongly about burning them, because if you just take those buggy branches and you go chip them and spread them, what are you doing? You're telling the bugs to come over this whole area. It's just spreading the bug stink around. So I get irritated when I see people saying, "Oh, don't burn it. It's a fire hazard, fire hazard." I'm like, oh my gosh, but if you burn it at the right time and in a safe way, then you're keeping those bugs from coming back, right? They make cool earrings. Some of the cocoons look really neat. They're all like, I've made a bunch of jewelry with them. So yeah, I did a custom garment for a couple people. I've done a couple custom garments, and I would happily do more custom garments for people. But the issue is, nobody wants to pay. Nobody wants to pay for it. They want to pay target prices for a piece of art, right? And I just can't do that. I can't do that to myself, right? Like, I can't charge less than what the materials alone cost, right? That doesn't make any sense. And what's the point if I'm just breaking even? If I'm just charging for materials, then I'm just breaking even. My labor's worth nothing, right? My concept is worth nothing. The concept, that's the intellectual property. So, like, if I were to sell this garment, if I were to make this garment to sell to someone, I would, let's see, this fabric was $14.79 a yard. And there is, and the white fabric, that was, what was that? Is that $11.95? $11.95 a yard, $11.97 a yard. And the buttons, I bought those for $12. So there is, what was this, like three yards of this fabric, and that's, let's round it up to 15. So 3 yards of the fabric at $15 is $45, and then this fabric, to get the piece off of it that I needed to use, that was like a yard and a half, 2 yards, and so it's again, round up, that's $12, so that's $24. So here we are at, like, with the buttons, we're at about $70 of materials, right? Not including the thread. That's another $8.99. Okay, plus the time. So the garment took me 24 hours to make. I made it in a day. So what's my labor worth? What's the idea worth? What's the original pattern worth? So I don't know if I made this garment for somebody, I'd probably sell it for like $200 retail. I'd have to charge more than that, though, if I were going to sell it through a shop, right? If you're going to buy it from me, I could sell it for $200, but I can't really do that if I want to be able to sell in a store, right? Because you split, and it's usually 40-60 when you're dealing with a gallery or a store, right? And the store gets 60. That's usually what the split is, not 50-50. It's usually 40-60. And so I have to, if 40%, if I'm getting 40% and I want $200 for the dress, right? That's 40%. That means the store has to sell it for like $500. Isn't that amazing? Who's gonna buy this dress for $500? Who's gonna buy that dress for $500? Nobody. They can go to Target, right? With cheap materials, and they'll wear it for one season, and they'll throw it away. So we're going to sell these earrings. I think I have these earrings listed for sale on my website. You just wipe off the ear hooks. It's like going and buying earrings at the, they're one of a kind. I'd sell the earrings for like $300. I guess, what do I have them online for? I might have them on there for less than that. I might have them up there for like $150 or something. I don't know. I don't remember. I have to look. Nobody ever buys my stuff. But a lot of people knock it off and make it cheap. But that negates the fine art aspect of the work, right? Who are we going to meet today? Shall we meet Corey? Who do we have left? Corey. Corey is the only one in this book that we haven't met yet. We haven't met Corey yet. Who do we have in here? We met Oren. We met Oren. We met Saeed. We met Lawrence. We met Denny. Ooh, I think Corey might be the only one left. Corey is the only one left. Consenting Adults, an Intimate Exploration by me, Corey. I wrote this one on January 28th. Corey. Corey's feet were freezing. He pulled his knees toward his chest in an attempt to bundle his body heat under the hotel sheets and blankets. He couldn't find the thermostat anywhere, and his call to the front desk was unfruitful. The promised assistance had never arrived. Eventually, he had taken a shower and gone to bed. At least the water was hot. Corey listened to the wind whip around the building. His room was on a corner just a couple floors from the top. A flagpole must be up there, he thought. It sounded like there was a loose rope smacking in fairly regular intervals. He shivered and pulled the comforter over his head. With his head covered, he finally warmed up enough to fall asleep. When he woke to the alarm on his phone, Corey was surprised to find the room was not only warm, but sweltering. Sometime in the night, the heat had kicked on and tried to make up for lost time. The hair at the nape of his neck was actually damp, as were the sheets. He was frustrated. He didn't really have time to take another shower. Corey swung his feet out of the bed and onto the floor. The sun was shining between the blinds on the window. A light snow was falling. It must be even colder than it was when he got in last night. The flakes were so small. Snowflake-shaped ice crystals were forming on the corners of the windows. Corey decided he was going to try and take a quick shower, at least rinse off. He didn't want to feel self-conscious. He couldn't believe he let his mother talk him into this. This was more than a blind date. He had flown halfway across the country to meet this woman. Corey considered his face in the bathroom mirror as he brushed his teeth. Who had breakfast for a first date? It was all arranged by his and Corinne's mother. He would have never agreed to such an arrangement before, but after Allison had accused him of assaulting her, he had been unable to get a date. Corinne's mother went to college with Corey's mom. They had pledged Delta Zeta together and took a trip to Vegas every few years. Corey had never actually met Celia, Corinne's mother, but he had answered the phone when she had called a couple times growing up, and he had seen photos. Corey's mother was full of mystery and kept her social life totally separate from her family for the most part. Corey's father told him once to count his blessings when it came to that. He said he most certainly would not like Celia, and he would like his mother with Celia even less. Corey had always been curious. Corey and Allison had dated off and on for 6 months. He had no idea what had happened. It all seemed to come out of the blue. He had waited until the 5th date to attempt anything past second base, and that had been more than consensual. She had practically torn his trousers. That last time, she had begged him to spank her. He finally had, but he wasn't comfortable with it, and he told her to never ask him to do it again afterwards. The way he saw it, he was the one who had been coerced into doing something he didn't want to do. Corey's mom said it sounded to her like Allison had been embarrassed. Whatever the reason, the damage had been done. Allison ran her mouth all over town. For a while, Corey felt like he couldn't even leave the house. A stranger at the grocery store had even made a comment to him in the checkout line about not wanting to get spanked. After that, Corey had pretty much given up any hope to get a date. It wasn't just that Allison had a big mouth. She worked as a publicist, so her big mouth had a long reach. When Corey's mother returned from her semi-regular trip to Vegas, she had a photo of Corinne. Corinne was attractive and conservatively dressed. What did he have to lose? His mother even paid for his flight. The hot water poured all over Corey's head, neck, and back. In the corner of the shower, he noticed a very curly hair that most certainly was not his. Well, on the off chance there was urgent chemistry, they weren't coming back to his room. Stepping out of the shower, Corey considered his reflection once again. Not bad. He wasn't Hugh Grant, but he wasn't unattractive. He was in decent shape, and he had a good job, and his mom thought he had a good personality. That had to count for something, didn't it? He dried his hair and slapped on a little cologne, then dug in his suitcase for his oatmeal Henley, brown cashmere pullover, dark wash Levi's, socks, and belt. His wool blazer was hanging on the back of the bathroom door, and his boots and hat were next to the bed. If things went well, he had an Oxford and tie for dinner, and the room for one more night. If things didn't go well, he knew there was a red-eye he could catch. Just as Corey tied his boots, the phone rang. It was the front desk telling him the car was there to pick him up. He told his mother he wasn't really comfortable with that and would rather either take a cab or use the GPS and drive his rental. But she told him this was the East Coast thing, and when in Rome, Corey gave in. He stuffed his wallet and room key card in the inner pocket of his blazer, pulled his hat on his head, and looked for his gloves. In the lobby, the lights seemed too bright. It was the sun reflecting off the snow that swirled outside. It had been a while since he had driven in the snow. Maybe this wasn't such a bad idea, and was that limo for him? It was. The driver stood next to the open door, holding a sign with his last name, Bolovich. Corey got in the empty limo, nodding to the driver, who smiled and shut the door behind him. Once the driver was situated in his seat, he rolled down the window between the front seat and back of the limo. "Shall we stop for flowers, sir?" the man at least 20 years his senior asked. Corey hadn't even thought of that, but it sounded like a good idea. "Yes, please," he replied. "Splendid. I know just the place," the driver said before rolling up the window. Corey sat back and watched the city blocks become more residential looking. Finally, they pulled into a corner parking lot. There was a coffee shop and a small stand with newspapers and roses. "How much farther are we going?" Corey asked the driver as he got out. "About another 30 minutes, sir," he answered. "Oh, okay, thanks." Corey turned to the stand and picked up a USA Today and a dozen pink roses. "Lovely choice, sir. Pink is Madam's favorite color. She will think I told you. You must assure her I did not," the driver said when Corey returned to the car. "Oh," Corey said, understanding for the first time that the driver wasn't hired to pick him up. He worked for Corinne. What was he getting into? This could go either way. Corey crossed his legs and opened the paper. When Corey looked up from the paper, they were driving up a long, winding drive lined with sculpted hedges. They were topped with snow. Ahead of them, a gigantic stone-faced Cape Cod rose up from the frozen ground. It was like something out of Architectural Digest. Corey was getting nervous. He hoped they were picking Corinne up. The driver parked the limo under a carriage house port and announced they had arrived. The driver opened Corey's door and ushered him in the direction of the front door. Corinne answered the door in a flowing caftan and heels, a bottle of champagne in hand. Corey wanted to run. This was more than he had bargained for. "Roses! Colin must have told you to get pink," Corinne squealed. The champagne wasn't open, but something told Corey it might not have been the first bottle of the day. "No, ma'am, he did that all on his own," the driver said quickly. Corinne snatched the roses from Corey, looking at him from head to toe. "And so cute," she slurred. Corey could see her lipstick was smudged, and he could smell the alcohol coming off her breath over the strong perfume she was wearing. Corey didn't know how much money this broad had. Corey didn't care how much money this broad had. He did not want to be there. I don't think this is such a good idea. I think you need a cup of coffee, and I would like to go back to the hotel," Corey said, turning toward the driver, who now had a very concerned expression on his face. I'd love to go back to your hotel, Corinne slurred, attempting to drape herself over Corey's shoulder. He ducked her advance. That's not what I meant, Corey corrected her. Colin, is it? The driver nodded at Corey in confirmation. Colin, I would like to leave now, Corey said firmly. Certainly, sir, Colin replied. Corinne crumpled onto the floor, the flowers falling around her, and began to cry. The two men walked back to the limo. Once back in the limo, Colin opened the window between them again. I'm sorry, sir. You are a gentleman. Corey was angry with his mother, Corinne's mother, Allison, and himself. He was also irritated with Colin. Certainly, he knew. Being drunk at 10 in the morning didn't look like something unusual here. I just want to go back to the hotel, please. Colin leaned back in the seat and closed his eyes. What a waste of time this had been. When he got back to the hotel, Colin graciously declined a tip. Corey was pleased. Then Corey went back to his room, packed up, and checked out. He still had to pay for the extra night, but he didn't care. He just wanted to get to the airport and go home. He had to pay more than he normally would have liked, but he was able to get on a direct flight that was leaving in 2 hours. All of a sudden, he was famished. Corey checked his bag, then headed towards his gate, looking for something suitable to eat. It was a small airport. There wasn't much. As he approached the gate, he saw a hot, soft pretzel stand. He bought one with salt and a side of yellow mustard and sat to wait to board. A woman sat across from him, also with a pretzel. She sat down without looking at anyone and began to break small pieces off her soft pretzel and nibbled them, saving the knot for last, just like Corey. She looked so calm and centered it calmed him. When the time came to board, the woman sat in the window seat next to his center seat. Normally, he wouldn't have taken a center seat, but under the circumstances, he had made an exception to get home and away from the drunk Corinne. The woman smiled as Corey buckled his seatbelt. Going home or leaving home? She asked. Going. You? Also going, the woman replied. Corey closed his eyes and didn't open them until the attendant came through with the drink cart. He ordered a gin and tonic. That sounds good. Me too, the woman said. The flight attendant collected payment from them both and served the drinks. The woman held her drink up to Corey. Cheers, she offered. Cheers. Corey bumped his plastic cup against hers. Rough trip? She asked after they both took a sip. Corey rolled his eyes and sighed heavily. You have no idea. You? He asked. Funeral. My grandmother. She smiled a sad smile. I'm so sorry. Was she very old? Corey asked politely. Quite old. It was a relief, really, but family is no fun for me, the woman said. I know what you mean. I'm not looking forward to seeing my mother when I get home, Corey offered. Oh, do you live with her? Corey almost blew his drink out his nose. Goodness, no. Then he proceeded to tell this total stranger his sordid tale. The woman laughed. Corey did too. The woman told Corey how her grandmother had been a midwife and that there were over 400 people at the funeral who she had never met who had been delivered by her grandmother, and how her father had gotten drunk and disowned her. As the plane began its descent, Corey realized they had been talking for almost 4 hours and he didn't want it to end. Do you live far from the airport? He asked. Not too far, but not real close. I live on the east side of town, she answered. Corey lived on the east side too. Me too, he exclaimed. I know this is Ford, but would you like to get dinner with me when we land? Corey asked bravely. The woman smiled. You know what? Yes. You know Jake's Pub on 7th? Corey's eyes widened. It's a block from my apartment, he said. As they deplaned, Corey carried her carry-on in one hand and held her left hand in his other as they headed to the baggage claim. I've never had such a nice experience on a plane. I did have a guy once pretend to fall asleep and stick his hand between my legs, and then yell at me and tell me that me and my mama were ugly. As if, it was some gift. He was going to stick his hand in some ugly girl's crotch. Oh, yeah. Awesome. Was I supposed to tip him? Pretending to be fucking asleep. I slid my arm up underneath his arm and I flipped it in his lap. And he's like, what are you doing? You're rude. You could have said, excuse me. I'm like, I could have said, excuse me. I could have said, excuse me, excuse me. Giant dude. He was huge. He was huge. This was when I only weighed like 110 pounds at the time. Seriously. And he was like pushing 350. He was big. I'm not just talking like meaty. He was big. Big fucking dude. So I know, like, you know, there's not a lot of room in those seats, but still. He did not need to stick his hand in my crotch. Then the flight attendant comes over and threatens to call the police on me. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm obviously the one who picked this fight. And there was some asshole on the other, sitting on the other side of me, who wouldn't speak up. He was like, oh, I didn't see anything. How did you not see nothing? How did you not see nothing? There's me like this, squeezed between these two giant men. And he didn't see nothing. My foot, he didn't see nothing. My foot. Anyway. I hate getting on planes. I hate it. It's very uncomfortable for me because it always sits and pushes my head forward, and that does nothing to help the bullshit I got in my neck. And my feet don't touch the ground all the way, and so my knees hurt by the time I get off. And there's always somebody sticking their hand in my lap, you know? You're ugly, so's your mama. I said, I'll pray for your grandma. He said, you're crazy. That's what he said to me. Uh-huh. Fuck you and your big diamond earring. I don't even know who he thought he was anyway. Thought he was doing me a favor. No. Anyway, I think it's time for me to go make some scrambled eggs. Yeah.